I'm not
fundamentally
asking whether
racist.
racism exists. I think you
You know,
already admitted that you believe racism exists,
you know?
right?
Of course,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah, of
right,
course it
right. So you
exists.
know
That's not the
racism
question.
exists. We're not. We're
I think
yeah.
I think what's in argument is whether or not our the primary principle for how our how everything's organized is based off racism or white supremacy. That's the part that I contest.
Oh, you're so okay. So you're contesting
You
the
know,
integration of white supremacy in our institutions and practices.
correct. Yeah, yeah. Like I don't believe that's the case because
Okay, good.
at one point we had actual laws in effect that tasked the government to be racist. Like that was a reality, and the cure for that was removing those laws. Right. So my position has always been the cure for systemic racism is to stop it.
Okay,
Done.
so
You
you're saying that the cure
know?
for racism is to remove the laws that enshrine racism into our legal system.
Correct. Yeah, laws and policies. And right now, the only policies that I see that are in effect are ones that are based in racial equity, and because I think you had admitted earlier that racial discrimination is fundamental to that. And so
Yeah,
I
yeah,
don't.
but you're skipping over. You're skipping to the end without dealing with the beginning issues, right? Like if you're never again. If you always skip to the end without dealing with the beginning, you could come to any conclusion you want. We have to go sequentially, okay, Mr. Logic and Reason and Science, okay? We have to go sequentially if we're going to get to a proper conclusion, all right? So
Yeah.
we agree that racism exists. That's our point of agreement.
In society, yes, of
Yes.
course.
The
Yeah,
next
yeah,
level, though, is that you said you don't believe white supremacy is integrated in our institutions and systems.
sure.
Um, and so I think that's the place that we need to focus on, right? Because
Yeah.
there is a quite a lot of information to disprove to show that white supremacy is integrated in our systems. Like there's a lot. There also isn't a lot of evidence to show
Mm.
that getting rid of racist laws would actually stop racism in any way. So you've come to a conclusion that getting rid of those laws was putting an end to racism or starting an end to racism, which I can at
Systemic
least.
race, systemic. I'm talking about. Yeah.
So for you, systemic racism means racism that operates through the law.
Well, yeah, because that's the only, in my opinion, that's the only way it could be systemic is when you have rules in effect that you know pretty much forces one color of person to always remain oppressed, while the other color of person gets to elevate themselves.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I don't see any rules like that other than certain policies that are based in racial equity that task the government to expressly discriminate based on skin color, which that I find to be
Yeah,
a
yeah,
huge
yeah.
red
You've
flag.
made that very clear. But like
Yeah,
again, we're never that ending part is gonna look different to you if we deal with the beginning part, which you are loath to do apparently. But like,
okay,
if we deal with the premise, the conclusion is gonna start to make a different kind of sense to you. That's what I'm trying to
yeah,
explain to you. So
okay,
like
make it make sense.
so
I'm
I'm
down.
gonna try. Right. So in terms of the premise, right, the premise of white supremacy being integrated into our systems, right? It's part of why it's not making connecting for you is because like there's a whole generations long history of how that happened, brother. There are like facts about what occurred that you do not know that still have a significant impact on what's going on racially today. So that whole
Like what?
universe of thought of like how white supremacy was integrated into our systems, how it operated, like again, that's what I said earlier, right? Like all the mechanisms of how it works in our systems, the reason why you don't think it exists is just because you've never learned about it. It's not because it doesn't exist, it's because you've never went and tried to learn about it. And ultimately, didn't I tell you that there's no space, no one's instructing you on white supremacy in school. No one's instructing you about race or racism and like how it operates in school. The only way to learn about this is to actually seek out the information. If you latently receive the information, what you're going to learn is something that is false. With in To use your word, it's inevitable that what you will learn is false. Why? Because there's been a generations long campaign of misinformation about this subject matter, which is an aspect of white supremacy. You would
So
know
can I ask
that
you
if
this
you
question?
studied white supremacy, right?
Can you give me your most compelling evidence or example of white supremacy being a guiding factor in society today?
Um, what do you mean by a guiding factor?
Like where white supremacy is in charge of where white what hold on, let me think, where white supremacy is is the cause of disparity, is the primary cause of disparity. Can you give me your most compelling piece of evidence or example of that effect?
Yeah, sure. I'll give you an actual real life example, okay?
Yeah.
So, I think I was at a poker game, if I recall correctly, and I was just talking to a couple older racialized white gentlemen, and they were talking about their sons and also another one of their family members. And they were talking about, they were like talking about, oh yeah, they're getting ready to graduate college, they're doing this and that. And they were talking about what they're going to do, right? And it was all like, well, my accountant, of 30 years, he's gonna hire my son, and then my son will be able to then take over, right? So while you would just probably think of that as being, well, of course, like maybe that's nepotism, or maybe like it's like a family connection or networking or whatever, but ultimately it also has a racial element. Why? Because that relationship he developed 30 years ago with his accountant, and that his grandfather developed with the previous guy who got into that was all based on a system that was racialized against black people. So no black person, no other racialized person had an opportunity even to get into that network, nor is that guy looking outside of the network that was established back then in order to do his hiring in the present, because that would be more work for him. So it's not like he's thinking racially. It's not like he's saying, oh, like, and nor is he looking for the best qualified person, right? He is just giving his son an opportunity, and he has someone willing to do that. And that's the beginning and end of the analysis for why he got that job. A lot of people get their jobs that way, through someone they know, through a connection that was made in the past or in the recent present. And it's more likely that people will be in a network with people who are racialized like them because of a legacy where people were socialized to look at other people as inferior human beings.
I see a fatal flaw with that argument. Those networks happen with all races of people, because we have all races of people at every level of society. They all establish their networks that way,
I don't think
or
that
not.
that's a fatal flaw. I'm not disagreeing with that.
And so you're making a huge assumption,
What assumption did I
that
make?
because you're using I asked you, show me your most compelling piece of evidence of white supremacy being the guiding factor behind disparity today, and you brought up that example. Like that's not evidence of that, because that
Okay, well,
scenario
you're going to
happens
have
with
to
all,
say more than that. It's not evidence. You're going to have to explain why you think it's not evidence, okay?
because it's like that scenario happens with all races of people, right? Because all races of people are at every level of society. So you can't use that one example, say white supremacy, when that actually happens with all types of people.
But what about what I actually said? Like, you have to at least like use what I said to you're just saying that I'm wrong, but you're not giving any reason.
Well,
So
no, my reason is that because
what is your reason?
those
What is it?
those networks happen with all
That is
types of
that is not
people.
a reason why I'm wrong. Like, I never disagreed that those networks don't exist among different groups. So like, I don't understand why you think that that's a point in contrast to what I said.
So hold on. What's the exact detail in your argument that says systemic racism?
What I was explaining, brother, is that people look within their own individual cultivated networks. Those networks have a legacy, a racial legacy. It's very simple. People look for hiring in the networks in which they exist. Those networks are racially divided because of the legal discrimination and social discrimination that existed for generations in the country. It was not that part of it was not cured by changing the law. So like that, I was trying to give you an example of how it can still impact the present, even though nobody may be consciously thinking racial thoughts, because they're still acting out the same actions, and we're still living in a largely discriminated, or excuse me, segregated society here. So like that's my point. That's what people are trying to talk about when they connect past and present, because we see it play out all the time. Like it's very easy to observe if you decide to look.
You know, as a person who's had to like confirm the existence and understand problems, right, to be able to solve them, that's not like an aha moment for me, man. You know,
That's fine. I mean,
because
that's fine if it's not an aha moment for you, but why
yeah,
don't you actually deal with what I said and actually try to say why it's not? Okay, because you haven't. I don't know if you realize, but like you literally haven't said a single thing contrary to my point yet. You just said that you don't agree multiple times. So you're going to have to come up with something, or your scientific mind is maybe not as scientific as you thought. Let's go, man. Come on.
well, because I don't think you could. I didn't, when you looked at that specific instance that you're describing, like I don't think you said anything that confirms the assumption that white supremacy is what gave that person the opportunity. Like I don't think you said anything that confirms that to be true for that particular person.
The reason the reason why it's true is because of the network that was created, brother. Okay? The network was clearly created under a racialized society.
His network? You're talking about his network.
Right.
I don't like. Where's the evidence of that?
Okay. Where's the evidence that our society is heavily racialized?
No, no. Where's the evidence that his network was created as by that principle? Like, because you're making a judgment about the system based on what this person was telling you about how this person was being chosen.
I was trying to give you a real life example of how it could work, okay?
Yeah.
But like let me try to give you something more specific then. Hang on. Let me choose another example. So let's think. So let's see. Right. So my friend is a doctor in Oklahoma, and um, so what am I trying to show again? How white supremacy is integrated into our systems?
No, how white supremacy is the primary driver
Okay,
of
no,
disparity.
listen, brother. You keep framing it that way. The primary driver of disparity. Let's be clear about what people actually mean when they talk about disparity. They're talking about racial disparities.
Correct.
Racial disparities.
Yeah, racial disparity. Yeah.
Right. So race is the only thing that explains racial disparities.
Well, no, because people make different choices, and you're going to find.
No. Listen. I understand people make different choices, and that those choices can influence outcomes. However, if you are simply measuring race, you do have to understand, it goes back to the first thing I said again, race was imaginary and created as imaginary. Do you understand that?
How is it imaginary? It's something
Right,
that
exactly. So you don't know that, okay? If you study the history of race, what you will learn is that the racial hierarchy under which we all exist was imaginary. It was literally made up and then justified on the back end with false science, with religion, and through academia.
Well, hold on. The word race is just to describe the physical.
No, brother, that's not correct. No, that's another sticking point that people were trying to tell you. That's not what race ever was, okay? That's what you have learned, but that is not correct.
I feel like we're going on a tangent, though.
No, this is very important. It's fundamental to understanding what's going on. That's why you don't understand, because you have a different conception of race than what it actually is.
I just feel like we lost track of what we were talking about.
No, but this is good. That's okay. Let's continue down this line because this is important. Like race was like a racial hierarchy, right? Putting white people on top, like they literally created a pyramid and put white up here and put black down here and then put yellow in the middle and put red here for for Native Americans. These categories were literally imagined and then created, and then they were like, oh well, the reason why we're ranking humans this way is because of X, Y, and Z. And then they justified it. Okay? So racism came first. And then they used it to fuel a racial hierarchy of categories of race. It wasn't the other way around where like they discovered somehow scientifically race and then they were like, oh, well, we're just objectively figuring out that people are classified into these groups based on skin color. That is not the history of how race was established as a hierarchy. That is made up. Like, what really happened is they were racist and then they created a racial human hierarchy and then they tried to find ways to justify it and make it acceptable. And then they did that through the institution of slavery in America.
Okay, but today, when someone says the word race, they're literally talking about a skin color of people.
No, brother, that's not correct.
Like, that's literally what they're talking about today.
No. Fourth time.
That's always been my observation.
Time that's not correct, but like, you are not correct about that. That is not what people are talking about. And maybe that's why you're having so much confusion of like what people are saying. Nobody believes that because I have brown skin that it means something about me. Okay? The only reason that anyone thinks that because I have brown skin it means something about me is because a tyrannical racial hierarchy based on racism was implicated all those generations ago. That is the only reason. If that didn't happen, nobody would be thinking anything about it. It's not necessarily
that it means something about you. Like, I don't know what you mean by that. If you mean as a person, but it's a characteristic used to describe what you are. You know what I mean? Like you're you know, you're different. Like, black people are physically different from white people, and that difference is their skin color.
That's what we describe as race when they say race. I'm trying to explain it. That's the fifth time. All right, you are dead set.
That's been my understanding.
I'm just telling you that wasn't right. And if you deconstruct that and reconstruct it correctly, then what people have been saying to you is going to start making more sense, because that's the fundamental understanding. We finally found it after an hour, 2 hours, but that's the fundamental understanding, is that you thought race was solely talking about skin color difference. That's never been the case. And nobody who's talking about it on social media, almost nobody, means that when they talk about race. Because it was never about skin color. Skin color was the way that they ranked us as humans. So it was their way of identifying where you are on the ranking. Okay? But it was never meant just to like qualify that you have brown skin or some other color skin. That was never the intention of creating the racial categories or how they were utilized, brother. Okay.
We're gonna have to pause this discussion. I have to.
No. Do your thing. Okay.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Let's talk.
I'll stay.
We'll continue. We'll continue this online.
Okay. All right, brother. Well, thanks for joining me. Okay. Be well. Take care of your mom. All right.
You too. Take care.
Bye.